Hello everybody, today I'm back with the part 2 of the audiobook of My Brief History by Stephen Hawking. And today I'm going to read the chapter St. Albans, which is the second chapter of the book. In 1950, my father's place of work moved from Hampstead near Highgate to the newly constructed National Institute for Medical Research in Mill Hill on the northern edge of London. Rather than travel out from Highgate, it seemed more sensible for him to move the family out of London and travel into town for work. My parents therefore bought a house in the cathedral city of St. Albans, about 10 miles north of Mill Hill and 20 miles north of central London. It was large Victorian house of some elegance and character. My parents were not very well off when they bought it, and they had to have quite a lot of work done on it before they could move on. Thereafter, my father, like the Yorkshire man he was, refused to pay for any for the repairs. Instead, he did his best to keep it up and keep it painted, but it was a big house and he was not very skilled in such matters. The house was solid built, however, so it without withstood this neglect. My parents sold it in 1985 when my father was very ill a year before he died. I saw it recently. It didn't seem that any more work had been done on it. The house had been designed for a family with servants, and in the pantry there was an indicator board that showed which room a bell had been rung from. Of course, we didn't have servants, but my first bedroom was little L-shaped space that must have been a maid's room. I asked for it at the suggestion of my cousin Sarah, who was slightly older than me and whom I greatly admired. She said that we could have great fun there. One of the attractions of the room was that one could climb up the window onto the roof of the bicycle shed and thence to the ground. Sarah was the daughter of my mother's eldest sister Janet, who had trained who had trained as a doctor and was married to psychoanalyst. I don't know the meaning of it. Although, no, let's read it. They lived in a rather similar house in Harpenden, a village 5 miles further north. They were one of the reasons we started at St. Albans. It was a great bonus to me to be near Sarah, and I frequently went on the bus to Harpenden to see her. St. Albans itself stood next to the remains of the ancient Roman city of Verulamium, which had been the most important Roman settlement in Britain after London. In the Middle Ages, it had had the richest monastery in Britain. It was built around the shrine of Saint Alban, a Roman centurion who is said to have been the first person in Britain to be executed for his Christian faith. All that remained of the abbey was not very large, or rather ugly church and the old gateway building, which was not part of St. Albans school and I later went. Where I later went. St. Albans was somewhat sturdy and considered and conservative place compared with Highgate or Harpenden. My parents made hardly any friends there. In part of this was their own fault as they were naturally rather solitary, particularly my father, but it also reflected a different kind of population. Certainly, none of the parents of my school friends at St. Albans could be described as intellectuals. In Highgate, our family had seemed fairly normal, but in St. Albans, I think we are definitely regarded as eccentric. This perception was increased by the behavior of my father, who cared nothing for appearance of this if this allowed him to save money. His family had been very poor when he was young, and it had left a lasting impression on him. He couldn't bear to spend money on his own comfort, even when in latter years he could afford to. He refused to put in central heating even though he felt the cold badly. Instead, he would wear several sweaters and a dressing gown on top of his normal clothes. He was, however, very generous to other people. In the 1950s, he felt we couldn't afford a new car, so he bought a pre-war London taxi and he and I built a Nissan hut as a garage. The neighbors were outraged, but they couldn't stop us. Like most boys, I was embarrassed by my parents, but it never worried them. For holidays, my parents bought a gypsy caravan, which they placed in a field of Osmington Mills and on the south coast of Britain near Weymouth. The caravan had been brightly and elaborately decorated by its original gypsy owners. My father painted it green all over to make it less obvious. The caravan had a double bed for the parents and a cupboard underneath for the children, but my father converted it to bunk beds using army surplus stretchers while my parents slept on an army surplus tent next door. We had our summer holidays there until 1958 when the county council finally managed to remove the. When we first came to St. Albans, I was sent to the high school for girls, which, despite its name, took boys up to the age of 10. After I had been there one term, however, my father made one of his almost yearly visits to Africa, this time for a rather long period, about 4 months. My mother didn't feel like being left alone all the time. So she took my two sisters and me to visit her school friend Beryl, who was married to the poet Robert Graves. They lived in a family called Dea on the Spanish island of Majorca. This was only 5 years after the war, and Spanish dictator Francisco Franco, who had been an ally of Hitler and Mussolini, was still in power. In fact, he remained in power for another 2 decades. Nevertheless, my mother, who had been a member of the Young Communist League before the war, went with 3 young children by boat and train to Majorca. We rented a house in there and had a wonderful time. I shared a tutor with Robert's son, William. This tutor was a potage of Robert's and was more interested in writing a play for the Edinburgh Festival than in teaching us. To keep us occupied, he therefore set us to read a chapter of the Bible each day and write a piece on it. The idea was to teach us the beauty of English language. We got through all Genesis and part of Exodus before I left. One of the main things I learned from this exercise was not to begin a sentence with and. When I pointed out that most sentences in the Bible began with and, I was told that English had changed since the time of King James. In that case, I argued, why make us read the Bible? But it was in vain. Robert Graves at that time was very keen on the symbolism and mysticism in the Bible, so there was no one to appeal to. We got back as the Festival of Britain was beginning. This was the Labour government's idea to try to recreate the success of the Great Exhibition of 1851, which had been organized by Prince Albert and which was the first World's Fair in the modern sense. It seemed a welcome relief for the austerity of the war and post-war years in Britain. The exhibition held on the south bank of Thames opened my eyes to new forms of architecture and to new science and technology. However, the exhibition was short-lived. The Conservatives won an election that autumn and closed it down. At the age of 10, I took the so-called 11 plus exam. This was an intelligence exam that was meant to sort out the children suited to an academic education for the majority, who were sent to non-academic secondary schools. The 11 plus system led to a number of working class and lower middle class children reaching university and distinguished positions. But there was an outcry against the whole principle of once and for all selection at the age of 11, mainly from middle class parents who found their children sent to schools with working class kids. The system was largely abandoned in the 1970s in favor of comprehensive education. English education in 1950s was very hierarchical. Not only were schools divided into academic and non-academic, but the academic schools were further divided into A, B, and C streams. This worked well for those in the A stream, but not so well for those in the B stream, and badly for those in the C stream, who got discouraged. I was put in the A stream of St. Albans School based on the results of the 11 plus, but after the first year, everyone who ranked below 20th in the class was assigned to the B stream. This was a tremendous blow to their self confidence, but which was never recovered, from which some never recovered. In my first two terms at St. Albans, I came in 24th and 23rd respectively, but in my third term, I came in 18th. So I just escaped being moved down to the end of the year. When I was 13, my father wanted me to try for Westminster School, one of Britain's main public schools, which in the United States are called private schools. At that time, as I mentioned, there was a sharp division in education along class lines, and my father felt that the social graces such as school would give me would be an advantage in life. My father believed that his own lack of poise and connection had led to him being passed over in his career in favor of people of less ability. He had a bit of a chip in his shoulder because he felt that other people who were not as good but who had the right ground and connections had got ahead of him. He used to warn me against such people. Because my parents were not well off, I would have to win a scholarship in order to attend Westminster. I was ill at the time of the scholarship exam, however, I did not take it. Instead, I remained at St. Albans School, where I got an education that was as good as, if not better than, the one I would have had at Westminster. I had never felt that my lack of social graces had been a hindrance, but I think physics is a bit different from medicine. In physics, it doesn't matter that what school you went to or to whom you are related, it matters what you do. I was never more than about halfway up to the class. It was a very bright class. My class work was very untidy, and my handwriting was a despair of my teachers, but my classmates gave me the nickname Einstein. So, presumably, they saw signs of something better. When I was 12, one of my friends bet another friend a bag of sweets that I would never amount to anything. I don't know if this bet was settled, and if so, which way it was decided. I had 6 or 7 close friends, most of whom I am still in touch with. We used to have long discussions and arguments about everything from radio controlled models to religion and from parapsychology to physics. One of the things we talked about was the origin of the universe and whether it had required a god to create it and set it going. I had heard that light from distant galaxies was shifted towards the red end of the spectrum and that this was supposed to indicate the universe was expanding. A shift towards the blue would have meant it was contracting. But I was sure that there must be some reason for the red shift. An essentially unchanging and everlasting universe seemed so much more natural. Maybe light just got tired and more red on its way to us. I speculated. It was only about 20 years of PhD research that I realized I had been wrong. My father was engaged in research on tropical diseases and he used to take me around his laboratory in Mill Hill. I enjoyed this, especially looking through microscopes. He also used to take me into the insect house where he kept mosquitoes infected with tropical diseases. This worried me because there always seemed to be a few mosquitoes flying around loose. He was very hardworking and dedicated to his research. He was always very interested in how things operated, and I used to take them apart to see how they worked. But I was not so good at putting them together again. My practical abilities never matched up to my theoretical inquiries. My father encouraged my interest in science, and he even coached me in mathematics until I got to a stage beyond his knowledge. With this background and my father's job, I took it as natural that I would go into scientific research. When I came to the last 2 years of school, I wanted to specialize in mathematics and physics. There was an inspiring maths teacher, Mr. Tahata, and the school had also just built a new maths room, which the maths set has had as their classroom. But my father was very much against it because he thought there won't be any jobs for the mathematicians except as teachers. He would really had liked me to do medicine, but I showed no interest in biology, which seemed to me to be too descriptive and not sufficiently fundamental. It also had a rather low status at school. The brightest kids or boys did mathematics and physics, the less bright did biology. My father knew I won't do biology, but he made me do chemistry, and only a small amount of mathematics. He felt this would keep my scientific options open. I am now a professor of mathematics, but I had I have not had any formal instruction in mathematics since I left St. Albans School at the age of 17. I have had to pick up what I know as I went along. I used to advise undergraduates at Cambridge and keep 1 week ahead of them in the course. Physics was always the most boring subject at school because it was so easy and obvious. Chemistry was much more fun because unexpected things such as explosions kept happening, but physics and astronomy offered the hope of understanding where we came from and why we are here. I wanted to fathom the depth of the universe. Maybe I have succeeded to a small extent, but there's still plenty I want to do.